Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome back to our next session of the Healthspan Show 2021, entitled Effective Business Models for Testing, Tracking and Biohacking Consumer Health. I hope you've all been enjoying the week so far. For those, if you haven't been so far, just a quick reminder to please keep your questions coming in for our panel throughout the discussion. Just to the right-hand side beneath here, you'll see the chat function for the live discussion. Please do keep the conversation going with each other, but if you do have a question for our panel, please post it in there and we'll get to as many of those throughout the discussion and at the end as we can. But for now, delighted to hand you over to Raewyn Guerrero, our moderator for the discussion. So Raewyn, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Josh, and thanks everybody for joining. Good morning from California and good evening in the UK and good morning in Australia because it's already tomorrow. So we've got this fantastic panel today. We've got Carlotta from myDNA, Carlotta Petti, who has got a PhD in nutrition, and we've also got Nina from Avenna, who's the founder and CEO, and Hamish from Thriva, which is also based in the UK. So I'm going to hand over to each of them to give a little brief intro into what they do and how it fits into our topic today, which is around the effective business models for testing, tracking, and biohacking consumer health. So let's start with Carlotta. Over to you.
Thank you, Raewyn, and good day to everyone. I work for myDNA, which is a company based in Australia, and it's a genetic testing company, but really it's more of a personalized wellness and health platform. So my role, as Raewyn said, I'm more on the scientific side. So I am the scientific director of the Nutrigenomics part of the business. And due to my background, which is heavily science-based, but also I had exposure to pharma industry and medical devices. So I have, luckily, as a scientist, I could also get exposed to the business side of things. In my role now, I'm really focusing on understanding what it can talk to the customer in an effective way coming from the science. So I can translate the science and the research that is in the evidence, in the published evidence, into something that it's really understandable and meaningful for the consumer and actionable. And that really captures what myDNA is doing. So trying to translate complex information that comes from the genetics, but not limited to the genetics, into actionable and meaningful advice that it's personalized to each individual. In a nutshell, that's how we do that and how we fit into the biohacking. I guess, for us, biohacking can be seen really as a way to use science technology to improve the health of the consumers. So that's really fits in our mission and vision of our company, where we want to really empower people to take control of their health and put in practice the recommendations that are best for their goals and their health.
Fantastic. That really does tie in really nicely with everything that we're going to be talking about today. Nina, over to you, because you are talking about new biomarkers. That's what Avenna is about. So please share with us.
Yes. Hi. Yes. Good afternoon and good night and good morning to everyone. So I'm a founder and CEO of two companies. One is Avenna and another is WellCode Life. And in Avenna, we are developing precision medicine solution to deal with the pandemic of inflammatory diseases. So our first technology, which we are translating into clinical use, is called GlyHealth, which is effectively in vitro diagnostic platform or the biomarkers based on glycomic signatures of individuals. So those tests, which are currently commercially available, but then also we are working on several in pipeline for inflammatory bowel disease and for COVID-19, in fact, as well. So those are allowing to track chronic inflammatory status of individual and detect disease at early stage. So those are belongs to the wider and buzzword, which currently a lot of biohacker knows, omic biomarkers. So it's in fact allow you to early detection and then treatment personalization for various inflammatory conditions. And my second company, actually, I started 5 years ago, and that's when the biohacking industry just started to kind of come up to life. And we developed this concept, or start working on the concept of personalized scientific wellness. And that was really creating the health transformation programs based on the various biomarkers and various life tracking your life trajectory, and then also understanding what's the biomarkers you have, and then personalizing nutrition, fitness, and lifestyle changes based on your biomarkers. So yes, so that's us. All right, and I think you might have frozen.
That's really amazing. Like, we're doing such great work. I would love to hear more about that. I hope you guys can still hear me. You just cut out for a little bit. So I think it's phenomenal. It's particularly the work that you're doing around IBD and COVID-19, and I want to dig into that in a little bit. But Hamish, can you share with us about more about Thriva? I'm very familiar with Thriva. I've recommended it to a number of my own clients, like when they can't get regular blood counts from their GPs. I do send them your way. So please just share with everyone exactly what Thriva is and your journey into how you became the CEO and co-founder.
Thank you, Raewyn. Yeah, great pleasure to be here, especially with such brilliant people on the panel with me. So yeah, I'm Hamish, I'm the CEO and one of the three co-founders of the business. We're a UK-based health tech company, VC funded, now a team of 85, all based in London. Other than me, I'm in my shed. You know, Thriva's mission, our goal is very straightforward, difficult to do, but very straightforward, and it is to increase health span. So, you know, square peg, square hole in terms of the title of this whole program. And our particular approach is by creating a core capability around remote diagnostics and adding value to people. It's just that people exist across the continuum of health. Some of them are looking to stay well. Some of them are looking to get well, having become unwell. So we have a Thriva branded direct-to-consumer proposition, which is all about helping people to get regular, affordable, intuitive access to the information inside their bodies. We have started by focusing on what you can learn from blood tests, and there's self-collection kits that you can do at home and are processed by tier 1 labs. And then we've got a very rich layer that makes all the data easy to understand, and a digital therapeutic capability to help people understand what they can do with it. And on the other side, we have a platform services business where we're powering healthcare providers, insurers, hospitals, GP surgeries, and the UK government, where they need to introduce remote diagnostics as part of their solution. So yeah, drawing all that together, we very much see the time is now to make good on the promise of prevention being better than cure, and fundamentally to flip healthcare on its head and to identify issues early, so that we can be more effective as a race. That's, I think, one of the key things for us as human beings to be better at.
I love that. Prevention is better than cure. I feel like that should be the theme for all of the stuff that we're all doing, because that underpins everything that I do in my own practice. And it sounds like it's everything we're all striving towards. Like, how do we get more predictive and be more proactive around what's going on with our health, and bringing that to consumers and making it more available? So in the context of that, I think our first question should be around, well, why biohacking and why now? And I think Nina's already sort of touched on the fact that, she's looking into being more predictive and proactive around things like COVID-19 in particular. So I want us to maybe, Nina, maybe you could kick us off with that. Why are you looking into these sorts of solutions? And is it because of the pandemic that, looking at these kinds of predictive biomarkers have come into the forefront for you and your business?
Yes, for sure. So we've been working on those biomarkers even before. So we understand that there is several elements to that. So number one is why now? Because now people also became very cautious and to understand what their current health statuses are, what they truly are. Because in lots of occasions, people can feel good, they look good, but then we have heard all of these horrible stories when actually people who even can be young enough, but then they have the worst outcomes once it comes to acute conditions such as COVID. So I guess what is really fundamental and important is to understand your true health status. And then also, obviously, if you have this tools, predict your future health trajectory. But kind of like stepping back to your fitness of your immune system. So one of the tests which we currently have available to consumers. So we have kind of similar model what Hamish was describing. So we have to B2C, but then for more clinical biomarkers, we're also working with biopharmaceuticals and clinicians. But our B2C is really measuring your immunofrailty status. So what is your currently status of your immune system, how frail it is? And then based on that, how susceptible you are to chronic inflammatory conditions. And then what can be potentially your health outcome if you're unlucky enough to get acute inflammatory conditions such as COVID. So for us, those kind of, with COVID tragedy in the world, now more and more people coming and trying to see, well, my other biomarkers can be good enough, I still can be okay, feeling okay, but what's where I'm hitting in terms of my health trajectory. So that was quite exciting developments in this field.
Sounds amazing. Carlotta, do you have anything to add to that, particularly from that sort of like space of genetics and epigenetics? I know from me in 2017, that's when I first tested my DNA and, got to understand a whole bunch of things that were going on under the surface that I'd suspected, but then I got confirmation. So just in the context of what's happening globally right now with people being more and more aware of, certain biomarkers that they need to pay attention to, how do you think that genetics plays into that?
Absolutely. So, genetics is obviously a very important, as we know, determinant of health. So it's absolutely very important to know where you stand from in terms of, predispositions and risks, if you want. We also know that genetics is not the only thing, and that's why it's also so important to look at actual blood biomarkers and many other things, and actually have a holistic overall view of your current situation. But in terms of the genetic part, definitely we know that in the last few years, the progress in the findings have really escalated to an amazing deal. So we have, we don't just talk about, for example, nutrigenetics or nutrigenomics. We talk about epigenetics, metabolomics, and so on. So the amount of evidence that it's out there, it's really amazing. The point, though, it's always to look at what is meaningful and actionable right now, just because the evidence keeps evolving with time. It's important, I think, to focus on what has the strongest evidence at the moment, and then keep adding as we go and as we know more, just to try and avoid to make things that are already so complex, like getting to know about so much data and so much things about yourself. It's important to actually be able to select based again on evidence, what is more relevant and what we can actually use and has an utility for the person, really. So that's my view on that.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. What I think is interesting throughout all of this is that, everyone's saying like, you can't just pick one thing and look at it in isolation. And that's the thing that I'm very keen on. Like, we need to get a really full picture of everything that's going on with someone. So genetics will be that kind of underlying. It's like, that's like the basis of what's going on with the engine, and we have to check and see like what's going on with your tires and the oil and all the other things. And that, if I love using car analogies, by the way, when it comes to health, because I think people can relate to it quite easily. So Hamish, so if we look at things like what Thriva are testing, can you share a little bit about how you think that plays into this sort of like being more proactive and predictive around overall health, and how we make that, and how you're making it? Because it sounds like you've got the same sort of model that I use, where we send kits to people and they get to do it from the comfort of their homes. So, and how's that been working out, and how has that been helping in terms of changing the trajectory and helping people be more proactive around their health?
Yeah, so it's a really it's a broad church of an answer. So I'll try and synthesize a few different parts. The first thing can I play with your car analogy? The first thing that we've certainly come to appreciate fulsomely is you've got to get people in the car, right? You've got to start by getting them to engage. And one of the great challenges is recognizing that if you bundle everything together, if you try and measure the engine in the cars and the sub chassis and the, you know, whatever it is at once, you're probably looking at a price point of $1,000, right? And that is a place that most people can't afford to start. So engagement for the people who need it most is a very worthwhile exam question. And actually, there's an interesting adjunct to this, which is why do we have biohackers? Where do they come from? And how do you take that impetus and look at a really impactful set of changes that will impact the people who need it most? Because, you know, candidly, oftentimes biohackers are on the healthier end of the spectrum. Just to talk a little to the question you asked about, you know, how do we think about the long-term view here? You know, for us, we're not a blood testing platform, though we've got a good pedigree in that historically. Yeah, we're bringing in actually a whole variety of additional data sources from some of the omics. I think Carlotta hit the nail on the head. It's all about actually what's credible at the moment, because there's a huge amount out there that very much isn't. But also using it intelligently. So yes, omics, but also, you know, are there other types of predictive capability by looking at the data that we've got, and, you know, probably starting to augment it by understanding people's environments. So in our case, we've got the integration of wearables and sensors on the roadmap, because we know that understanding what's happening on the inside needs to tally with actually what people are experiencing in their environments, so that we can start to build better algorithms that can predict where people are going. So we're creating a biological age clock as an example. So we can say, hey, look, let's make all of that really complicated stuff really simple. Your body today is expressing at 45 years old, but you're actually 35 years old. Or the reverse of that. Your body's saying it's 25 and you're 35, and, you know, well done to you. So, you know, all of that stuff, I think, is super interesting to discuss, because if you can't get people bought in, then the best science in the world doesn't matter, because fundamentally it won't get used.
Yeah, sure.
I'm 100% in agreement with that. I love the idea of the biological clock. You know, back in my days at Barclays, we used something similar when we used to do like it was a subjective health questionnaire. And what I love about what we're doing right now, because, you know, wellness has had like it's all been very subjective, you know, but what we're doing here right now and what we're talking about is these are objective measures, right? And these are the things that are actually going to move the needle with regard to people's health going forward, because it's not just about, well, how do you feel? It's more about like, well, what are my cells doing? How are they functioning? How do I function?
No.
And that's going to be going to change things for us. And I think I just froze again, but I hope I'm back.
You're back. You're back.
You're back.
In terms of, I'm back. Yeah, I saw everyone freeze and I'm like, that means I'm frozen too. I'm back. So just in terms of talking about moving the needle forward, right? So it sounds like your model, Hamish, actually, I just kind of want to dig back, go a little deeper into that, where you are getting people bought in. I want to talk a little bit more about that. How are you getting people to buy in? Because one of the challenges that I have seen, particularly in the UK, because I kind of straddle two worlds. You know, I started off in the UK and now I'm in the US, and between the US and Mexico a lot. And they're, you know, the healthcare systems, they're so different depending on your geography. How do you get people who have got, let's say, socialized healthcare? How do you get them invested in putting money out when they're like, well, I can just get that done with my GP? How do you get them engaged? Because you mentioned engagement, and I want you to kind of talk about how that's been working out for your company.
Yeah, no, gladly. And good timing for another freeze. Raewyn, you're back. So the first thing is we do work with the incumbent healthcare providers, I think, as Nina was touching on, because you have to accept that people are not always going to be well. And we want to provide people who are unwell with the same product privileges as people who are trying to stay well. And that just talks to healthcare realities. To your specific question on how do you get people engaged and what's, I guess, what's unique about our approach, There's a few things. Number one, and by the way, there was a question about whether people are doing this with a degree of ongoingness, and the answer is yes. So we work really hard to help people understand the value of doing this on an ongoing basis, very much with them in the driving seat and putting them in control, because health isn't a snapshot event, and you need to be able to add value over time. So how do you do all of that, and how do you get people started in the first place? Look, some of it is doing really, really, pretty complex thinking around branding and positioning. How do you make it exciting and cut through the noise? And that's not, it's not medical science. It's a different kind of science and different kind of art. It's about marketing. And I think in any market that's important, whether it's nationally funded or more of an insurance-derived model like the States. In our particular world, we recognized that people didn't necessarily know what we were about. It's like, hey, who are Thriva? Not heard of those guys before. And we wanted to sort of kind of flip the value exchange around a bit. So rather than being like, hello, we're Thriva, can we have some money, please? We wanted to be able to give people some value early. So using our proprietary data, we were able to build predictive models. They're actually very accurate. But say, look, if you just put in some information about you and your background and your lifestyle, we'll predict some blood test results for you. And that gives us the ability to show them what it's all about, get them immersed in the experience, start building some of that excitement, start trading off some of that value. So yeah, I don't want to hog the mic for any longer, but hopefully gives you a sense of how we're thinking about cracking engagement.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing. That was really, really insightful. Does anyone else have thoughts on that, Carlotta?
Yeah, I guess, I could share what we're doing at myDNA, which is, sharing a lot of what Hamish said, although, we are in the genetics, but for us, I guess, one of the challenges was also coming from the fact that we do genetic testing, which is still not something that a lot of people are used to, and they don't know exactly what this is gonna tell you. So there was a bit of a challenge in terms of how do we get people to actually do the test. But I guess the way we overcome this challenge is, so we started thinking that, our genetic testing is really aimed at improving the health and the wellness in the everyday life of people, and we wanted to make it accessible to the everyday person. So we know that everyone is obviously using their phone every single day for doing everything. They check everything on their phone. So the natural thing was to build an app. So we developed an app that people can access every single day, where they see not only their genetic insights, but also all the recommendations and the meal plans, the fitness plans, skin plans, and so forth that come from are driven from the genetics, but they also incorporate all the lifestyle factors. And that's how we can actually make an impact on every person's life every day, because that's how, instead of just developing like a PDF report, which is something we had before, where people maybe look at that once, they are overwhelmed by a lot of information, and then unfortunately it's very hard to make it actionable and use that information. With an app, you are constantly reminded of a lot of, your results and the things that you're predisposed to and the actions that you should take. And the other thing is also how we convey this information through the app. And maybe I'm anticipating something. It's about like a subscription model that we have built in, so that we can actually provide this information in small size, like bite-sized information, step by step, not to overwhelm the customer, but just providing these bits of information on a regular basis, so that the customer is engaged, is understanding and digesting little pills of information, and then we are educating them, keeping them engaged, and pushing them to be proactive about their health in that way.
That's amazing. So that scaffolding model really work. I can speak from experience as well. When I first started off in 2017, where I used to give them a giant PDF and tell them like, let's come back and talk about it. I worked on that sort of like that single session approach initially. And that's not sustainable when it comes to changing behavior. And like you said, you know, if you want people to change their behavior, you need to nudge them in the direction of with tiny pieces of information sustained over a longer period of time. So Nina, when it comes to, I know obviously apps, I think are probably the easiest ways to engage people, and your platform, can you tell us a little bit about that in the context of this question? Like, how do we kind of make things more accessible to people?
Yes. So first, just to kind of build on and feedback on what Carlotta and Hamish was saying. So it's quite in terms of the engagements, because what is very interesting is to understand that we had a lot of kind of consumer education to do. So the one element to that, everyone is now talking about this biological age, but then when the people really think about it, what is their underlying problems? So there is a concept of inflammaging, or when the people have some aging process links to the inflammatory processes in the body. So our test is really looking into underlining or kind of the core reasons of why people acquiring those diseases and why they're aging. So we're looking at the chronic inflammatory processes, and right now the biomarkers which clinicians use or practitioners and not necessarily medical practitioners, but other people are using is more linked to inflammatory markers, but they are not really measuring purely chronic inflammatory processes. So for us, it was, how do we bring this new innovative biomarkers into clinical practice and make them accessible and affordable to all? So that's actually the key, because the biohackers, they can be people who are like pioneers, or people who are able to pay a lot of money for something which has value for them. However, how we spread it into clinical use. And glycomic technology, which we're using, is a couple of years ago, it was price point was £1,000. Now we brought it down to less than 250. So it's kind of this point of affordability, but then also accessibility. How do we then integrate this biomarker with the other markers, which let's say like epigenetics, normal biomarkers, which I'm sure Hamish is having in his platform. So it's kind of 2 points. So number one is how do we make sure that consumer have the array of the markers in their head, and they're accessible and they're affordable to them. So yeah.
The affordability piece is the piece that I'm always looking into, because for my purposes, when I start off with a client, like we tend to try and get them to do their GP, but again, panels that the GPs tend to run aren't always as comprehensive as we would like them to. So if they get stuck, then we'll say, we'll refer on to Thriva or to Medichecks. These are online testing, like again, things that can be sent direct to their homes. But the other markers that aren't always looked into by GPs are, things like gut health, hormone, like a full panel of certain hormones, not just your typical metabolic hormones, but like things like cortisol, sex hormones, all those sorts of things that I like looking into when I'm working with people and helping them deal with, current states and problems, but also in terms of being proactive as well. So I kind of want to shift a little bit more into like, in terms of approaches to health and prevention, do we feel like the UK is leading in this space? Because Nina, it sounds like everything that you're doing, you're obviously doing it with an Oxford University a backing, right? Am I correct in saying that?
We are working with our sister company, Ludger, which is Oxford-based. We do have collaborations with TGU, which is a translational gastroenterologist unit in Oxford. However, we have a very interesting business model, but then also the model is we're working with the different members of healthcare ecosystem. So because our biomarker is also applicable for being a complementary diagnostic for the drug developers, so people who are developing anti-inflammatory treatments. So then we are working with the different members of healthcare ecosystem. And one element to add as well is like how to increase engagement, I would say, is that allowing people to see how they're improving based on the particular combined biomarkers or etc. to show them. So let's say they're implementing some anti-inflammatory protocols or anti-inflammatory treatments, but then to see how their health trajectory improving. So that's kind of also important elements. And it's also part of our business model to do multiple testing as well.
Well, it sounds like it fits in really nicely with what Hamish is doing as well, where he's encouraging people to continue, like, this is not a one-off. This is something that you need to be engaged with and doing over time. And so Hamish, that's one for you. Like, how often do you recommend that people are checking in, using Thriva and because you've got a beautiful dashboard. I've seen the interface, it's gorgeous. So it's really easy to kind of like track trends and see how things are improving over time. How often do you recommend that consumers actually engage in doing like the testing at home?
So funny enough, Raewyn, we're doing some work on that at the moment, because we started by saying, look, we're just going to put the default at 3 months, because it's the time horizon within which we know the biomarkers that we're looking at are going to potentially move. It was the most kind of consumer-centric thing that we could think to do, and then let people control the cadence to suit their purposes, recognizing you might be on a really hectic supplementation regime, or you might be going keto for a bit, or whatever it is that you might be doing, and therefore you might want to bring it in or push it out. But we've now, in truth, largely because we've managed to expand the team enough to be able to take this project on, because it's been on the roadmap for a long time, we're looking at building much more dynamism into, and by dynamism I mean automation, into the now what do I do next. So we've seen a set of results. Okay, actually this is something that you don't need to look at again for 9 months or 12 months, because the latest research suggests that isn't something that's likely to change for you because of the other things that we've seen, unless you then tell us, and it's why we're just launching our native mobile apps as well, so we can have a much more dynamic relationship with you, that you're doing something that would then change that recommendation. And look, it's in part also down to the fact that you have to acknowledge in any market, there's a degree of price inelasticity, right? And if you're able to say to people, look, these are the things that we think are apposite for you to test first, and then look, you don't need to worry about these things. This was the only one that was out of range. You might want to think about tracking that one again more, perhaps more quickly, but the others you don't need to worry about. That might then change the price parameter, which encourages people to do the next action that's going to kind of help them along that journey. Behavioral psychology principle 101 is, the quicker you're able to get people kind of through a first set of interactions where they're experiencing value, the quicker they're going to get their heads around what this might look like for them in the long term. And that we see is critical, because it opens up our ability to say, look, okay, you've now understood this part of your health internally. Well, there are these other pictures that you probably would benefit from. Let us help you understand which of those are most relevant next. And that might be omics, or it might be wearable integration, or it might be your biological clock. So let's show you what, let's show you how we can help you. And it might be that some of that has to be paid for. It might be that we can give it to you for free, depending on what it is. But it's kind of all about recognizing you're always kind of running into a headwind of, I've got a limited ability to pay for stuff. Let's help you kind of slipstream into the most relevant next action. And just to say really, really quickly, the thing that I think you started touching on in your previous question, which is really interesting, was let's acknowledge that people aren't always in one place, right? And you're going to find stuff. So this just literally a month ago happened with my wife. She started suffering from sort of fairly chronic fatigue, wasn't sure whether it was the sort of postnatal situation after having our last child. And she's married to me, so I said, maybe you want to do some testing, and did a comprehensive thyroid panel that wasn't available on the NHS, and picked up something that very likely correlated with Hashimoto's. But she wanted to speak to a specialist, because that's something that you want to talk to someone about to correlate your findings with. And I was able to connect her with one of the specialists on our platform. And the only reason I say that is there's an acknowledgement for all of us that people's realities aren't static. And if you're going to really serve them well, you have to be able to acknowledge that it is a continuum, and they're not just going to be wanting the same thing from you all the time.
That was brilliantly put. And I love that you check in every sort of like 3 months as well. I love that we started off talking about that's sort of like the kind of the gauge, like every 90 days it's a good time to like check in to see which biomarkers have moved. And the thyroid piece actually is one that keeps coming up in my practice, with women showing up with lots of issues with that and being dismissed because the traditional panels only look at TSH and they're not looking at antibodies, and when they push to say I need they're not looking at reverse T3, they're not looking at they're not looking at any of those things if they go to their GP, because the GP is like, well, there's nothing wrong with you. You probably just need an antidepressant or something. And I see that a lot with my clients who show up with anxiety. And I'm like, has anyone ever checked your thyroid? And they're like, oh yeah, but it was normal. I'm like, well, let me see what normal actually looks like. And you see that the ranges
are all, typically too conservative, right? So they won't look at some of the other deeper exploration around things like, T4 and thyroid antibodies and reverse T3. Unless they think there's a problem. But if you're, on the cusp of, and you're just inside the line, they think, we think you're fine. Whereas, Maisie Hill just released her second book. I think it was her second book. She might be stewing that I've got this wrong, but having released Period Power, she then did a book on menopause and talked a lot about thyroid and shared different reference ranges. And when you look at those, it's very clear that actually, people are reading from very different scripts.
Well, yes, it seems like
so, and I try to, sorry, go ahead, Nina.
No, it's just to add that it seems to be like 3 months is the magic number. We're also doing exactly that because the glycan structure is also changing with that period of time. So we are looking in glycosylation patterns on various proteins. So that's kind of the period where we're also retesting.
That's excellent. I think it works as well for behavior change in terms of people getting into good new habits and all those sorts of things too. So from a psychological a standpoint, it works really well. But I do love talking about this, the fact what you just brought up, something like the functional ranges versus the clinical ranges that I don't think most people are aware of. So the functional, when people come to me and say, well, everything came back normal and everything's normal, I'm like, yeah, but you still feel unwell and crappy. Therefore, things are not normal. And do you know that normal is actually based off the averages of 6? That's always like a lot moment for them that, what the clinical ranges of normal are about. They're not necessarily what functionally you should be, should be at, or optimal, ideally. So it's interesting that you brought that up. And I hope that that's something that people take away today, that if you are not feeling great or you're coming back all the time, from your doctors and they're telling you that everything's normal, but you still have something going on, not feeling great, you don't have a lot of energy, you're probably not sleeping well, your body temperature is not regulated. Those are things that you need to be checking into. And that's why wearables are so great, because they can tell you what's going on with you. And then obviously these things like, if you do your regular checkups, or you're investing in your own biohacking, by getting a Thriva kit every couple of months, or looking into things like genetics. And this is where, Carlotta, I want to talk a little bit about more epigenetics and how that plays into this, because I feel like that's the one thing that, we're talking about the things that are changing over time, these different biomarkers, but what can we do about they express themselves due to what's going on in our environment or what we're nourishing ourselves?
Yes, absolutely. You were breaking up a little bit, but I think I got what you were asking. And before getting to the question, actually, I wanted to also make a further comment on what you guys were just talking about in terms of not specifically the thyroid, but in general. I mean, genetics can actually add also a lot of value in that we are aware of the limitation that, a genetic test is not going to tell you about, what are your current values for certain biomarkers. But genetics can actually reveal, if you have certain predisposition in terms of maybe there's something in your iron metabolism that is not working properly, or maybe the transport of your one of your vitamins inside the body is not working properly because of your genetics. So that's already giving a lot of pointers to see, okay, which ones are the biomarkers that I should look at now, because I know where I'm starting from myDNA. So I think that's a very important point as well. And in terms of epigenetics, yeah, absolutely. Epigenetics is, I think it's gonna get really, really interesting in the future. I'm saying in the future because I think the evidence right now, there is a lot of evidence out there, a lot of exploratory type of evidence. In terms of clinical applications, I think we are still not quite there, but we are very close. And perhaps, I don't know 100% about that. There might be some areas where the evidence is a little bit more strong and we can actually use it for clinical applications, but definitely that's where the attention is right now, because genetics, in terms of nutrigenetics, as we are doing right now, the way I always explain is that, yes, your genes are not going to change throughout your life, obviously, but those genes that we look at, or those SNPs that we look at when we do nutrigenetics, are those ones where the evidence shows us that there are some lifestyle factors that can actually modify the effect of the gene, although the gene is not going to change, but is, where there are some factors that can actually modify and change the predisposition that SNP is predicting for you. Epigenetics is obviously plain prediction of prediction and really evaluation of what's happening right now. So there are these connections with methylations and so forth, so changing in the gene expression that can obviously have immediate consequences on your wellness and well-being and health. So I guess that's going to be a very strong point for the near future. As I said, I think we are really, there's a lot of attention on epigenetics right now from many points of view.
Thank you. We do have a few questions that have come in from the audience. So far, we're having a really good discussion and I'm loving what's happening here. I think we want to get to one of these questions because I think it ties in really well with what we've been talking about. So the big challenges in the science of aging is the lack of aging biomarkers. And I think there are aging biomarkers, they're just not widely accessible. And I think, Nina, you want to kind of touch on this one. So if you can comment on the opportunities for DTC testing companies to contribute to the search for biomarkers of aging, I'll hand over to you. I know a few things that I look for, but I'd love to hear what you look for.
Yeah, no, it's actually quite an exciting question. And also through this longevity summit, there was, again, overarching theme that people were saying, oh, we actually really don't have to search for biomarkers of the disease. We actually have to look at its underlying processes which are happening in the body, which leads to aging. So it's not that we're having, Alzheimer or diabetes or anything like that. And I think one of these processes is increase of chronic inflammation in the body as we age. So one of the things which people can look at and tracking, but then also working towards reducing in order to decrease your probability of getting chronic diseases is chronic inflammation. So we are developing this direct-to-consumer testing in order to look at it. Another big element or another theory of aging is senescent cell load. So with the other scientific group, we are looking how glycomics can actually contribute in identification of the senescent cells. I was just in a meeting with my science group, and we did this research in terms of, well, what are the tests right now available to understand what is your current senescent cell load, which is a huge determinant of your current age, chronological, biological, whatever you define it. So yes, it's super exciting how this new innovative biomarkers can look at and contribute to this underlying reasons of diseases and aging.
Can I just chuck a quick addendum to Nina's fascinating work there? And Nina, we should probably have a conversation offline about whether or not we can work together on that.
I've been thinking about that, by the way, that I was like, the three of you need to join forces because it just feels like it's all so complementary, everything that you're all doing, even though it's in different spaces. But yes, go ahead, Hamish.
Yeah, I was just going to say, look, I think I think there's really important work being done by the likes of Nina and others who are looking at the sort of complex dynamics of how you identify aging. I come at it with a passion for waiting for that to be there and looking at how I can build that into Thriva so we can improve the product for our customers. I also come at it from a slightly more rudimentary perspective, which is, we already know enough about what is causing the majority of problems in the human race, right? People are not eating what they should, not exercising the way they should, living with too much stress. I mean, I'm not revealing anything even remotely insightful here, but the reality is, if you could fix those things by even 10%, then I think we'd probably stop worrying quite so much about aging. You know, this is the Healthspan Show, right? And it's very much, I think, the appropriate thing to be asking the question around. And I think we can dumb this down to some pretty basic realities here. If you could help people to know where they are with some of the stuff that's been talked about today, you stand a meaningful chance of helping them to see why it's good for them and how it can be available to them to make some small changes to start stepping in the right direction. If it then turns out that we can quantify that their aging has been improved by some measures, great. And indeed, it might be that we can show them why it's worth starting by using aging in the first place. But I think there's low hanging fruit, I think is what I'm saying.
And that's always a great place to begin, because I think like when you can start with some of the more simple things that are accessible for people to get going with, and then you can start introducing some more of these other more complex, looking into anti-aging and other types of biomarkers. And you can go further upstream, but you can actually start like where you said, begin where the person's at and just in their everyday life. Just start with cleaning up their nutrition, eating unprocessed foods is a good, having clean water. That's something that I actually have forgotten about, because it's been something that's been so important to me in my life. But sometimes I get people on calls and we're halfway through, let's say, their 90-day protocol. And the one thing that I'm noticing, I was like, do you actually drink clean water? Where do you get your water from? They're like, oh, from the tap. And I'm like, oh dear. Okay, we need to work on like because of all the chemicals that they're being exposed to, and we're trying to reduce toxic load as they go along their journey. So even basic things like, are you getting sunlight? Are you getting good sleep? Are you eating unprocessed, foods that are not sugared or with added salts and things? So that's really important that I love that you brought that up. That's just like, basic things that we just need to get people back into thinking about, that we're biological organisms that need very simple things in order to thrive at the end of the day. Sleep, good food, light, water, air, clean air. So I think that's probably a good place for us to start to wrap up. And I think we have one last question from the audience, and then and then I'll hand it back over to Josh. But here we go. So one of the here it is. Sorry. This is from Paul Sklar. Are consumers paying themselves for these tests, or is the testing being covered by health insurance? And if people are paying themselves, are they buying ones, or is there some repeatable revenue from one consumer? All right. Who wants to take that one? Hamish, do you want to go with that one?
Yeah, sorry, I tried to sort of weave the answer to that question into one of my previous answers. So apologies.
And I think we did kind of touch on it, but I didn't know if anybody else had any other thoughts on it, because I know that you obviously your model is repeatable, so that you want people to be doing it more often. Nina, do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I guess from our perspective, what is really exciting, the same as for your company, right, what you're doing is puts an individual in this health journey. So it makes sure that they are excited of making the small changes. It doesn't have to be, doing the full biohacker supplement stuff. It can be as simple as what you've been saying. And I think this is really incredible opportunity for us to give them those tools to monitor their changes. And then also in some occasions, people, it's like with the weight loss, right? It's not going to be working straight away. So what are those sensitive tools we can give them in order to actually see their progress already? So kind of to answer this question, yes, there is usually in my other company, we also design those protocols, which allowing them to improve if the chronic level of inflammation came up very high. It's a journey rather than just one-off, which can be complemented with other things.
And Carlotta, anything to add there?
Yeah, well, just tying up with what I was saying before about our subscription model. I think if you compare when you just buy a one-off genetic testing, where the price can be in some cases quite quite consistent, especially a few years ago. Now the prices are always coming down, but with the subscription model, we actually take that upfront cost away and make it a bit more accessible for everyone, because then they just need to pay a little bit every month to keep going. So it's kind of taking a barrier off as well, the price point. And the other thing that allows us to keep our pricing quite low for the consumer to actually access the genetic test is also that we have our lab capabilities that we can actually reduce the cost basically for us for the testing, rather than having to rely on different labs and services. So that's another point that for us, I think we are quite proud in making genetic accessible to the consumer. So even keeping the prices quite low and accessible in that way.
And I think that's the way that we're going to have to tackle the global healthcare crisis. I think it's that accessibility piece. And I feel like that's a really wonderful place for us to end on, because, biohacking, we started off talking about, it's kind of elitist. It's kind of, it's for people who can pay and in their health. But if we want to actually create change and move the needle globally, not just in the UK, not just in Australia, and not just in the US, and outside of that socialized healthcare system, we need to make it easy for people to actually pay for and for them to actually do. So I love that sort of like approach where we kind of give them bite-sized chunks. We've got the apps to support them. We've also got that kind of repeatable, encouraging them to actually engage in that repeatable part of the journey, and that it's something that becomes part and parcel of their lives. And it's not just when a problem rears its head. It's more about like, okay, well, how can I be more mindful? How can I be more measured and be in taking this sort of new approach to looking after myself, and not waiting for when the car breaks down. We want to make sure that we're taking it in for its MOT, not once a year, but once every couple of months, that we're checking in on how things are going. So on that note, I want to thank everybody for participating, for joining us. Carlotta, I know it's like super late. It's time for you to get to bed. It's really, really late in Australia. Nina, it's so lovely to actually see you and meet you, and Hamish, finally we got to touch base and see each other. Thanks so much everyone for joining. And if there's anything that people want to follow up on, please reach out to our panelists via the platform, or you can visit them via their websites. So if you look for Thriva, it's thriva.co.uk. I'm hoping I'm getting that right.
Just
.co. .co. Okay, wow.
Just
so you're like me. Amazing. So thriva.co, and avenna.com is where Nina can be found, and Carlotta is myDNA Life, myDNA.life. Apologies, myDNA.life. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Back to you, Josh.
Fantastic, Raewyn. Well, you've kind of summed up much better than I think I probably could after this panel. A brilliant discussion. Thanks so much to all of our panelists. And please do reach out, see what how the services that we've all been talking about today can help you, and how can help consumers in general. Really, we have a few minutes until our last and final session of today's Healthspan Show on the lifestyle vertical today. What's next for the connected fitness revolution? So please do join us there. But thanks a huge amount to Carlotta, to Hamish, to Nina, and to Raewyn for guiding us through that discussion. And see you all shortly in about 5 minutes time for our next session. Thanks.